asked the guys to join us again. So welcome back, guys. We wanted their wisdom, and so it's a pleasure and honor for them to join us again. This topic today is to help empower you and your marriage, and that's why we're here today. So we welcome your questions, your thoughts, and we would love for you to comment on our Facebook page. So please just join in with your comments, and we will get to them as we have a panel of questions already ready, but we'd love to join in and answer the questions that you have. You are a part of this, and we want to empower you as well. So before we start, I'd like to introduce our panel, and if you follow us on our Whispers and Fringes page, you know these stunning faces already. We have two couples here. We have Joyce and Shubu George. They've been married for 20 years and have 3 beautiful children. And we have Lance and Anu Abraham, who have been married for 19 years. Along with their journey through their marriages, they also have served in marriage ministry. Shadi and I will be facilitating this discussion, and we have our amazing teammates, Vijoy and Binu, who will be addressing your comments and questions. So please join us today.
Yeah, and just to get started, we wanted to speak on behalf of the guys to the audience out there. Just to let you know, like, we'll be sharing a lot of things that we've learned over the last few years, but by no means are we like super husbands or perfect or anything like that. We have our areas of struggle, even like one time, and even like things that we struggle with over a period of time. So we are by no means perfect, by no means like without flaw. We're just here to share with you what we've learned, and hopefully it'll help you. So, yeah, just wanted to start.
That's great. So what we'll do is I'll address the question to the two different couples, so Lance and Joyce. As you know, every couple goes through times of rough patches where they go through an argument. So the question I have for both of you is, how do you go about forgiving each other when you have a disagreement?
Go ahead. Ladies.
Yes, I appreciate that. Well, what I really actually want to start out with is I just really want to be real with you guys that before I even share some kind of perfect formula about how to go about forgiving in a disagreement, I actually want to be just really real with you guys and let you know how I've done it the wrong way for a very long time. So for those of you who have followed us, both Shu and I are firstborns. So we have very strong personalities, and we both like to be right all the time. And so in being right, that also has to do with when we have a disagreement, and then we need to go about resolving this disagreement. Well, for the longest time, we have been notorious for just walking away from each other. And then when we come back together, it's sort of like a passive-aggressive thing, where we're just like, okay, well, it's over and done with, so we're just going to pretend nothing happened, and then we're going to keep going. There's also the times where we're really upset with each other, and we kind of just like shout, well, I'm sorry, you know, at each other, but we actually don't. Yeah. But we don't mean it. We're just kind of saying it for the sake of, look, I'll be the one who said it. You can't fault me for not saying it, you know, kind of thing. Or if I've been the recipient of the apology, this is where I've struggled a great deal. In my head, I'm like, well, I had to suffer with this for 6 hours. So that's great that you have apologized to me, but now you're going to suffer for 6 hours. So in other words, like, I smile and nod at you, and I say, sure, I forgive you, but then I go into silent treatment for the next 6 hours because you're going to pay for making me upset. So now that I've shared all of that, really delightful ways in which I did not do it correctly, I really feel like this is an area that the Lord has really taught me on how to go about doing it correctly. And I would say, and one of the things I will share is that I'm going to share resources along the way, because I certainly didn't come up with these things myself. So this was something that Shu and I both learned by going to Renew, and the program is actually called Re-Engage. It's put out by Watermark Community Church. But this is where we learned about what true forgiveness looks like, where, first of all, if I was the one who did something wrong, that it has to start with me having to come to Jesus meeting, and just really going to the Lord and saying, man, I think I messed up. I should not have said. I think I carried myself in a demeanor that was not respectful or honoring in any way. And I'm sorry, Lord. And so that's where it has started with me first, where I go to the Lord, and then I ask the Lord to show me, okay, if there is an area in me that needs to be corrected, please show me how I need to go apologize and go about resolving this. And so I go prayed up, to be honest with you. I don't let my feelings do the talking anymore, or I try not to anyway. So then I go over to Shabu and I confess what I did wrong. Hey, I raised my voice. I shouldn't have done that. I should have talked to you about that. And then I have to take ownership for it, and I have to acknowledge that I'm sorry. But it's not enough for me to just say that I'm sorry. I then have to ask you to forgive me as well, because that's taking ownership again, that I have done something wrong, but I don't want to move forward unless I know that you've forgiven me. And so that has definitely helped us a great deal in being able to take ownership for that. But also, the flip side of it is that when Shu comes to apologize, that I have to let go of some things. Like, I can't hold him, time him for 6 hours and make him suffer, but I have to be quick to accept his apology, and I have to move on. Instead of doing what I'm notorious for doing, which is kind of keeping my record of wrongs, and instead of saying, well, you did X, Y, Z, I mean, if he's apologized and he's asked for forgiveness, it's time for me to say, yes, I forgive you, and let it go. And so that's how I, Betsy, would share that we now go about in forgiving one another after we have a disagreement with each other.
Right. That's great. And I think two things that you mentioned was coming to Jesus first. Because I think he gives us the wisdom in the words that we're going to say to ourselves. And then also acknowledging the things that I did wrong.
Yes.
Because I think that's hard to do, and once those words come out of your mouth, that's the first step in healing towards that disagreement.
Yeah, so I think it has to deal with the fact that I pick apart words a lot. So when I read this question, it was this thing, how do you go about forgiving each other with a disagreement? And my thought went to, well, you don't have to forgive each other for disagreeing. Like, some people get wrapped around the axle with that. The disagreement isn't the issue. More than likely, it's the behavior during the disagreement that you have to ask forgiveness for. So, like, first starting there and making sure, like, okay, I'm not really upset about the disagreement. Like, because that's why, honestly, God brought you together. It's because you have different perspectives on things, a lot of things. So, once you get past that, then what Joyce says was so critical is going first. Like, coming to Jesus, what the Holy Spirit does with you is he convicts you, but convicts you gently. He's like, hey, is that really the best way to handle that? And then he starts revealing these things, and that's when you come to your realization. I think the other thing is the idea of going first, and Joyce touched on that. Pastor Mike had said something that always stuck with me when it comes to this. He goes, in those conflicts and in those type of moments, would you rather be right or reconcile? Because oftentimes we have to choose one first. And a lot of the time we want to be right. So that's why when somebody comes at us with something, we're quick to defend. Because we want to be right or we want to be understood. More than being reconciled. You want to be both, but which one are you going to pursue first, right? So you go in there and that kind of allows you to take honest inventory. And then you go in and speak to your spouse and you start first. I think what she said was perfect in terms of going first and saying that. Now, one of the things that I did want to add on to what she said was it's going to become very apparent, your motives are going to become very apparent. So if I come in and I say, hey, Anu, like, we have this thing and yeah, I'm sorry I said I said something to hurt your feelings and make you cry. Do you have anything you want to say? Right? People are going to know whether you're sorry because you want to get something first, or whether you're genuinely sorry and don't expect anything in return, especially in that moment. So tone is really important. The words you use are really important. And where is your heart? And that's why you got to give the Holy Spirit a chance to really do a work in you, because you will approach that conflict or that conversation with a much different posture than you would if you're just going in to get your apology in, but get a better one back.
Right.
You know?
That's good.
So, and I think when it comes to like settling putting yourself in the other person's foot. Like if my spouse had said that to me, would I bow up? You know, would I be upset? Would I be that's like a great place to start. Or if I heard my sister's husband or my brother's wife saying that to him, how would I feel? That's a great place to come to self-realization. And then let the Holy Spirit fill it.
I think I like what you said at the beginning too, in that, you know, there might be a viewer that's watching saying, well, my spouse is so different from me, but it's not about being different.
Right.
It's about you're going to have those situations, whether you're alike or different. How are you going to come to an agreement with that? So that's great.
So I have a question for the spouses now. We just talked about forgiveness, and humility does play a large role in that. Are there what other ways does humility bring itself out in marriage? Or what does humility look like in marriage? I know we talked about forgiveness, but are there other things that you guys can speak to as far as humility and humbleness in marriage?
Ladies first.
Okay, so I think honestly for me, I don't think of myself as a proud person. I just generally don't. But unfortunately, I think marriage tends to bring out the best and the worst in us, and I will see pride definitely creep up in marriage. And here's the thing, is that I really don't have any problem asking Lance for advice when it comes to things that I don't know about. When it comes to cars or technology or even
That's better.
no, like honestly, even certain situations where I'm just like, I really have no clue what to do here. I have no problem getting his input there. But the problem comes when I really feel like I am right about something, and then he starts to question that. And so that's when I really feel the pride kind of rising up. And that's not to say that you can't ever think that you're right about something. I think humility always adds that caveat, but I may be wrong. I think that's where the key difference is. And I think it's hard again in marriage, because with our spouses, there's a couple of things. First of all, they see the worst in us. So there's a lot of opportunities for growth and a lot of opportunities for them to maybe bring some type of correction. So again, your ego is going to be bruised in those moments. But here's the other thing, is that we also see and know the worst in them. So in that moment, pride will say, well, who does he think he is to tell me that? Whereas with humility will come in and say, I know who he is, he loves me, and he wants the best for me. And y'all, I am, like Lance said at the beginning, I struggled with this 30 minutes before this video. So if we only had footage of that, it's so glorious. But this is real, this is a struggle, and this is I would say almost minute by minute battle sometimes when you're in a conversation. And I love, Proverbs 27:6 says this, wounds from a friend can be trusted. A wound still doesn't feel good, but there's something about it that you can still really trust, and I think that's where I equate kind of the humility into this. So, Shibu, it's your turn.
Thank you. You know, I think Lance said that we weren't perfect, and Joyce will say I am perfect.
You heard that, right?
Yeah, so, yeah, as perfect as I am, I recognize that, you know, as I grew up and I saw what were my people who I looked up to, how marriage is supposed to be, how I'm supposed to act like a husband, and how I'm supposed to operate, all of those things were very key to how I took on my role as a husband, and humility was not anywhere in the picture. And to me, humility is, how can I serve my wife? And this is the area that I struggled with, is how can I serve her? How can I help her out? Either when she is sick or not feeling well, or helping around the house, helping with the children. I took on the role, or I took on the thinking that she's got this, she's the mother of the home, she can run it, she's good, this is her house, and she can do all of that stuff, and I can just kind of do my thing, work on the business, do my work stuff, I can deal with the money and all of those things, and I'll handle all that stuff. Everything else, you go ahead and handle. I don't have to get involved in this, even if it has to do with cooking, whatever it might look like. I thought, you know what, she's got this. And after having more conversations around what it really means to have humility about serving the other, being able to give to her what she is needing, and really being one-on-one and kind of bringing it together, right? Either be in the kitchen or around helping with the kids, some way, shape, or form, or taking the trash out, or whatever that might look like. I've got to step up when it comes to being around. Sometimes Joyce will say, "Hey, just come to the store with me." Where I'm like, "Yeah, you go ahead. I'm gonna just keep working over here, or I'm just gonna be on YouTube and just watch this, and you go ahead and you do your thing. And when you come in, I'll make sure that the kids are gonna help with the groceries when they come in through the door, and as soon as the garage door opens, they're running to go get you help." No. I think that really changes the shift to like, I'm also part of the solution. I'm part of the family. I'm somehow helping her to bring the family to one. Because one, I'm an example to my son.
Yeah, right.
I'm an example to my daughters. What a husband is supposed to look like, how he's supposed to serve, how for a father, and how you're supposed to do life is a big thing. And I don't think I did that well. But until having a solid conversation around in this area, that I wasn't really doing my best to kind of help in, and it took a while for me to step up and just be around, even if she's just cooking and standing there. It's like, what can I do? What can I help with? It wasn't natural. I used to just go and sit in my sofa and just kind of hang out and watch YouTube, and I have reasons for it. Like, I'm always studying something new, something more technical, and something of that nature. But that was also an excuse because I didn't have a reason to go help, even though it was to help her, to be by her side, and to be a kind of a servant at the end of the day. How can I serve the family, serve her? And to me, that was the big deal about what does humility look like in the marriage. Stepping up that way versus going, because a lot of everything that we do is how we perceive the world, and how our parents did it, or how our uncles did it, or how men in general have been doing it. And it's always been, you got this part, I'll do this part. We don't ever have to do this together. And I think when God asked us to become one, it was every aspect of becoming one. It's in every area to become one. If we're going to be in His image says we are one. So.
And when I think of the analogy of like Christ and the church and the marriage analogy in that sense of serving one another and like I said too, wanting the best and believing the best for each other, those are two things that I think of when I think of that analogy. So I think those are really great answers.
Pastor Stephen said something really interesting about arrogance and humility today, and he was talking about the spectrum. He said, on one end of the spectrum we have arrogance, which we easily associate with not having humility. The other side is insecurity. He said, with arrogance you think too highly of yourself. With insecurity you think of yourself too often. What do other people think about me? What are they going to think of this situation? This, and this. So when it comes to humility, it's a combination of being, I would say confident is what's in the middle. Like, you have a healthy sense of self, and then what you choose. Do you choose the other person before you? Do you place, like, humility looks kind of the same in other parts of your life than it does in marriage. So kind of associate it and make the connection.
Yeah, that's good.
So many of our listeners have probably learned about love languages. So this question is for the women. So in your lives, do you think that knowing your spouse's love language really matters?
Yes, it does.
A resounding yes.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, so I have the book with me in case you guys don't already have a copy. I highly recommend The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. It's an easy read, and it is an extremely helpful read for all marriages, wherever you find yourself. But I will say that when we first got married, and it's a story that I love to tell everybody. So I am all about cards. I love words of affirmation. That's one of the 5 love languages, okay? So I love just writing note cards and writing little notes all the time. Oh, and I love precious moments figurines for anyone who might not know about those are anymore.
We're taking an offering. Anyway.
So anyway, and I love the precious moment so much because there's always a beautiful little sentiment on the bottom. It's about the words, right? So here we are, we get married, and I just want to shower with my love. And I go and I buy the most beautiful greeting cards. Oh, they're just adorable. And then I go and I get the little figurines. Precious Moments figurines.
You bought him
For
precious
my
moments?
husband. Yes. Yeah. Oh, it gets good. Hold on. I'm gonna redeem myself in a second. So he would take these cards and precious moments and I'm just like, oh my God, don't you just love it? It's so sweet and so thoughtful. And he's looking at me like, thank you. And I'm not quite feeling like those vibes that I was expecting, that the man was gonna gush over my thoughtfulness. And then I remember our first Christmas where he made this big hoo-ah about this Christmas gift that he got me. And not only was she super excited, but his youngest brother was too. And he was just like, oh my gosh, just wait till you see what this is. This is so amazing. And in my head, I'm looking at the size of this box and I'm thinking, what could it be?
It's a big precious moment.
Right? Yeah. Because these two keep painting this portrait that like, this is the best gift ever. So Christmas morning comes and I go and I open it up. And we're going back to 1999, yes. It was a head unit.
Pioneer head unit.
Come on.
Come on.
For my car.
Wow.
Wow.
And I looked at it and I'm like, you shouldn't have. And the two of them are like, don't you love it? Don't you love it? It's amazing. And I'm just
You
like,
can take the face off just for face plate.
That's that security.
Yeah.
So let's just say, yeah, knowing each other's love language makes a huge difference because he and I both thought like we were really showing each other this amazing display of love. Because it turns out that Shu's love language was about the amazing gifts. I was about the words of affirmation, and neither one of us were showing each other how we actually wanted to be loved. So at the end of it all, to be honest with you, we didn't feel loved. I honestly didn't feel like he knew me. I didn't feel like he cared about me. I feel like he didn't spend time to really understand what made me happy at the end of the day. And the truth is, at the end of the day, the man just wanted $1,000 gifts all the time. And my $2 cards weren't cutting it. So I wasn't showing him.
I feel like there needs to be
It still seems fresh.
I don't see the problem. I really don't. I still don't see the problem.
So all that to say, Betsy, I think that there is great value in picking up this book and understanding all 5 love languages, because it's not just words of affirmation or giving the gifts. It could be the quality time. It could be physical touch. But getting to know what your spouse's love language is, and then really being able to show your spouse how you love them in the way they love to be loved, affirms for them that you're thinking of them, that you care for them, and that you genuinely love them. So I think it is incredibly important to know how your spouse feels loved.
Right, and that'll be a great book for newlyweds, because you want to do that early on in your marriage. But even if someone has been married for 19, 20 years, it's still a good book to pick up so that they can, maybe things can change if they're having, problems understanding their spouse, or why did you get this gift for me, or why did you do this for me?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, I agree, because this was not a book, by the way, that I picked up immediately. There's so many things that we will share today that I really did not learn 10, 15 years later down the road, but we're still here, guys.
Right.
So here's hope for you too.
And then I'm the same question for you.
Yeah, Joyce, I think, just really said it so well, but I think it is so key, and I almost feel like it should be a part of even premarital,
Yes.
because I don't think we discover this until later on, and if you go into marriage with this knowledge, I think you just start communicating better from the get-go. And really, you did describe it so well, and I think the only thing I would add is that none of these languages are wrong. So if your spouse communicates one way, you communicate a different way, it doesn't mean or wrong, it's just different. And it's based on how you grew up, how you were wired, different experiences you have, and that's all okay. I think just the key is learning it and then making an effort to communicate in that language.
Yeah, I think it's hard for, at least it was hard for me to understand that words of affirmation was Joyce's thing. For me to be like, Mom, you did a good job. Your chicken curry was fantastic. Like, I did it by going, man, this thing is dang good. I can keep my mouth shut and keep eating. It's like, is there enough salt in that thing? Are you okay? Are you good? Or, I mean, she's praying the whole time. I'm like, no, I mean, this is, but I didn't realize that she's trying to get those words of affirmation out of me by looking at how I responded to whatever. Chicken curry was a perfect example, but cooking itself in general. But I have to be one publicly in front of the kids, again, going back to what, that was one thing. Like if criticizing in front of the kids is not a good thing, because then kids think that it's okay to criticize, and then it goes against the words of affirmation for my wife and for the mother of our children. So teaching them also how to give words of affirmation and to be non-critical in regards to respecting mom and respecting my wife was very also important too.
Yeah. Treat it like a physical language. If I spoke English and she spoke Portuguese, like how far would we get in our relationship? You know? And so then it's on me and on her for me to learn Portuguese so I can communicate with her and her to learn English so we can get a greater depth. So it's not too, like, yeah, everything you guys said is great. Just treat it like a language. It's not wrong. And, you know, it's just where you come from.
Yeah.
So I have a question for the guys. What safeguards do you have to protect your marriage, including handling relationships with people of the opposite sex? And I'll tell you, I'm invested in this question personally because I am one of those girls that had a ton of guy friends. I had very few girlfriends, and growing up, all through college and everything, and then one by one, they all started getting married, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we can't relate to each other anymore. So I'm really interested in the guys' perspective about, not just about safeguards protecting your marriage, but especially with regards to people of opposite sex.
So I'll answer this one first just because I relate to you. Growing up, I had a lot of friends that were girls. I didn't have girlfriends, right? So it wasn't foreign to me, like this thing of, I just related better to girls growing up at that point. So I think the thing that's kind of interesting here is, first of all, you guys should know, like in that same way, where we may see things a little bit more similarly, we see things a little bit differently when it comes to this. And so the first thing I would tell you is, there's no thou shalt not when it comes to this stuff. There's no like direct 10 commandments that says, as a married person, you don't go in this situation, you do go in this situation. It doesn't prescribe that way. But it does very strongly imply what behaviors could be, right? And if you don't believe me, just go read Proverbs. It talks about the risk that you have as a married person to somebody of the opposite sex. It talks about what a fool acts like. And it talks about pursuing wisdom. And so when you bring those three together, there are some general things. And so coming into marriage was also a big change for me because I just thought, yeah, I'll go hang out with girls. Not a big deal, we're just friends. And I had never had, actually up until Anu, I had never had a friendship turn into something more with a girl. It always just stayed as friendships. The people that I dated was whatever, right? It was like I never dated. So when you come into marriage, then I think it has less to do with the actual safeguards because your history and your personality and all that stuff factors into that. It's going to be different for each of you. What's more important is the intent. Like, do both people want safeguards, right? Because if I run across a person that feels like after they get married, they should still have the exact same rights that they did when they were single, they don't want to change anything, and they don't understand why anybody needs to change anything, I'm good, then that's a conversation we need to have. But if you're on the same page there, then two things need to happen. You guys can work out the actual safeguards, like where and when, and understand that it's going to be a negotiation, like, because there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. So in our life, so the safeguard that I put in, I'm a very social person, right? And I have a lot of friends, and they're men and women. But the safeguard that I put in is that I try not to be, whenever possible, alone with somebody from the opposite sex, right? And the safeguards I put in is whenever I send an invite out, we're in groups, right? There's at least one other person there with me, right? And so I may send an invite out to multiple people, this, that, and the other, and I do that socially as well as at work and in ministry. Like, it goes all the way around. So in ministry, I don't ever do one-on-one counseling with somebody from the opposite sex. With work, it's like I try not to. The difference is, and this is the negotiation part, is the exceptions. Like, if I send a group invite out, but there's only one girl that answers the lunch invite, that's a conversation. I mean, it's like, you gotta work it out, because for me, I have a sense of duty to my company and the relationship that I'm trying to build with that client, versus her not having been in that position to be like, I don't get it. Why can't you just, so understand, and so once you negotiate that, also look at the track record. Like, I can't remember the last time socially I had a one-on-one dinner with somebody from the opposite sex. I can't remember the last time I've ever done that I have never done that for ministry, I don't think. And at work, it happens so infrequently. So what I ask her to do, to consider, is like my track record. How often are these dinners with the opposite, or lunches with the opposite sex happening? How often am I trying to go out with somebody from the opposite sex? Or how protective am I of a relationship with the opposite sex? Those kind of things kind of formulate the intent, like the heart issue. Because if the heart issue with your spouse is right, then you've got to be flexible on the exceptions, you know, and don't have a double standard. So it goes both ways. So the same way that I would like more flexibility in that, I give her flexibility. Like, we've had friends at our house that are male that have stayed here when I haven't stayed here. But I'm good with that, and I've made sure she's good with
Because you
that.
were traveling.
Because I was traveling for work, right. So, but it was like, it's a very rare exception.
Right.
It was like a tight spot, somebody needed to stay here, there weren't other options, and so on, and I'm like, yeah, it's no problem. But if I say, no, that's not cool, but you gotta give me license to go do this, there's like that creates a lot of unnecessary tension. So I think to put a bow on it, one, just understand this is something that is a little bit of a gray area that you have to negotiate with your spouse. First, get context. Do both of us want safeguards? Why do we want safeguards? Is there a history? Is there a bent towards something? Is it this and that? Okay, now that we've established that we want safeguards, what are they going to be? And if there are exceptions, how firm do they need to be based on our history and what's happened? Because I'll tell you, somebody who's had infidelity in their marriage, there's going to be a different set of safeguards than somebody who's been married 50 years and never had that. Right? So it's the actual safeguards they'll vary with mileage, but understand that it's not a concrete thing. It's a discussion with your spouse, and then make room for the exceptions.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anything additional to add to that. I think I look back at some of the safeguards that we have put in place. One is, when it comes to ministry work, I wouldn't be counseling or speaking to the opposite sex by myself. We would make sure that it is done together. That if there is a time where I'm being pulled aside by the opposite sex, I'd make sure that I'm in public and that there's public opportunity so people can actually see, there's a good distance. So there's some things that you would do to make sure that there's physical distance, that there's conversation that's open, people can kind of hear. But if it starts getting where it's intimate, and this is where the watch out for the red flag stuff come in, and that is, if the person that you're speaking to starts talking about either their spouse or starts talking about how their marriage is in trouble or something along those lines, and you're the opposite sex, and you're having this conversation, immediately put the brakes, and you got to bring in the right people in so that there's an open conversation, because that conversation, that red flag, that can turn into something that can be very dangerous grounds. When it comes to things like texting the opposite sex, if it's a friend, then include them. Include your spouse. So make it a bigger group, that there's conversation. What are you talking about? It doesn't matter if it's a close friend or a sister-in-law, or it could be anything, right? That the conversation is everybody's aware of what is it that we're talking about. And some people can take it to the next level, which is, Facebook is open, logins are open, you have access to all photos, you have access to the phone, nothing is locked, everything is open, and having that openness, I think having the conversation with your spouse of what the safeguards are and what it is that you're looking for, because what makes them feel safe should also make you feel safe from both ends, right? So that's important. So what that looks like, it can differ, right? I think when it comes to work, I think being in public, when you're having meetings, it should never be a low-lit place where if you do have to, that it's not a romantic spot, it's a spot that's open. McDonald's, Shake Shack. Make sure that it's well lit, there's safe distances, all those things are in place, so that the key to all of this is, where is your heart? If you think that you're gonna walk into this meeting, or you're gonna meet with this person, what is your intention anyway? And if you're struggling in this area, talk to somebody. Talk to a good guy friend or someone, or a pastor or something, that this is an area that you struggle with. I would say talk to somebody, because we do have feelings about certain things, and I think it's important for a guy to have an open relationship with someone who's fatherly, who's a believer, who they can trust, a pastor of some sort, and say, hey, listen, I struggle in this area, I need to talk to somebody so that I do safeguard my marriage, and it is important. My marriage is important to me. So what can I do to prevent my mind from going there, and the intentions that my heart might have? And I might have a bent toward it because of exposures that I might have had in the past, and not realizing that this stuff is popping up because of the exposure that I might have had in the past. So keep those things in mind when you're having to deal with meeting with someone of the opposite sex, either it be in ministry or work or in between somewhere. Keep those guards in place.
Yes.
I was gonna say, I'm so glad that you mentioned, the red flags, because I feel like, particularly when you are friends with someone of the opposite sex and they start talking to you about their marriage problems, you're like, oh, you know what, they're just a friend, they're confiding in me. And a lot of people don't realize that you need to pump the brakes right there. So I'm so glad that you said that.
Or if you don't feel comfortable being that confrontational, just say, hey, I'm gonna bring in my spouse.
Right.
Let's talk about this together. I think there's just a couple of things that you mentioned that I just want to add to. One, you're not safeguarding because you're paranoid about what's going to happen. Safeguards are more like how you would treat like security system. Like, I don't buy a security system every moment thinking that somebody's going to break into my house. But I also, in the event, if it should happen, I want to have protections in place. So it's not, a lot of people take that as like a you don't trust me thing. And if people come to me with that, I kind of tell them, well, do you really trust yourself that much that you don't want any protection? Because very seldom do inappropriate relationships or interactions start on purpose. And I think we tend to give ourselves too much trust until we walk into an area that's very foreign, right? And we're kind of in the wilderness there. The other thing that I would say about safeguards is this is more about making sure, and this comes back to the friends thing, is your spouse has to feel first, right? And so when you have relationships that create insecurities around your spouse feeling like they're the ones that are emotionally the closest to you, that causes a whole myriad of other issues. And so if we're talking about the order that God sets, it's God, spouse, kids, and family and close friends, right? So once somebody down here leapfrogs up to second place, you're gonna see confusion.
Right.
You're going to see conflict and all of these things. So it's a matter of just putting in order. That's what we're trying to do with Safeguards.
Right. That's good. And I know. Thank you for your questions. They're coming in. We really appreciate it because we want you to be part of this discussion. What we'll do is we'll finish up with what we have, and then we'll address this as well. But I have a follow-up question. I'm glad you both brought up kind of bents towards certain addictions, or maybe a spouse is emotionally unstable. So Anu, this question's for you. What do you do when your spouse is continually in that pattern of an addiction, or they're emotionally unstable? What should they do?
Yeah, this is something that honestly we see a lot in marriage ministry, and it just breaks my heart because you have one spouse who is really trying to work on the marriage, and then you have this other spouse who is disengaged or maybe caught up in something that they shouldn't be, and there's no effort to make the marriage work. So it really breaks my heart, honestly. And so I think the first thing I want to just say with this is, if there is physical abuse, get out. We want you to be safe. This isn't about, that. And so just please, you be safe. Your children need to be safe. So let's just say that first and foremost, if there's any kind of abuse. And I think the second thing is that understand that this is like, we have about like 15 minutes left even. So there's so much that we can get into in this, and we're not going to be able to cover all of that. So I would just strongly encourage you to get, if your spouse is willing, go to a marriage counselor. Like, it's great to get individual counseling if that's your only option, but the beauty of marriage counseling is that you want first of all, a godly marriage counselor who has a biblical foundation. But the thing with that is they can hear both sides of the story and then give you godly and wise perspective on that. And just to kind of really touch really quickly on the question about that, I think the first thing is just ask yourself, how can I help my spouse in this situation? Whatever, if it's a medical thing, okay, can I help them get to the right doctor? Do they need to be on meds? Is this just depression maybe caused by some kind of chemical imbalance? If it's an addiction, then again, same thing. Are they willing to maybe get in a support group, or can I ask them, can we bring in some of your good friends to just help you maybe stay accountable in this area? So I think that's just a couple of things, just really touching very briefly on that. And the other thing is also ask yourself, how can I help myself? Because you're going to need, whatever that situation is that's happening with your spouse, you need to have help too. And so whatever that may look like, again, not telling the world about what your spouse is doing. Find one or two close, if it's, as a woman, a female friend, if it's a guy friend, and people that are going to support your marriage first and foremost, and just be a support to you. We don't want someone that's going to bash your spouse. You need somebody that's going to be an encouragement to you in prayer and in wisdom. So I feel like just really briefly, that's kind of how I think we would maybe address that.
So I have a question from, I think, one of our followers. I'm going to direct it to you, Lance. It says, I am single, because I'm not single. Some people say I'm too picky. What are must-haves and deal breakers when it comes to choosing a mate?
Okay, so I know you're probably going to want me to say, don't settle, you're good, they suck, they're not real, they're not being real with you, this and that. And this is probably why people don't ask me these kind of questions, but I'm going to go older brother on you a little bit. And I would say if somebody's telling you that you're being too picky and you're single, especially if you've been single for a while, then I would say consider the source. Is this somebody that's close to you that's trying to tell you something? Like, are you in relationship with them and they know you pretty well? Because if that's the case, then you have a friend that is kind of stepping out on a limb to be honest with you and open a conversation about something. Because the likelihood is they made that comment because you complained about being single, or you were fearful about being single for a longer time, right? And they're trying to help. If it's somebody that you've talked to for 3 minutes and they just made a popcorn diagnosis and said you're too picky, then I'm not. I wouldn't dismiss it. Don't dismiss it. Go to your close friends and say, hey, I just heard this from somebody but I want to make sure I'm exploring this. Like, do you think I'm too picky? Right? And so I look at how I would counsel a single man or a woman that's been single for a while, obviously a woman. But there's a confluence of things for me that would make me say, hey, close friend, you might be being too picky. And it has to do with a really long list of must-haves and the way it has to happen, and that person is not putting themselves in an environment or a position to be in proximity of those kind of people. So I'm going to oversimplify. I want somebody that has a great job. I want somebody that's God-fearing, and I want somebody that is kind. And then I want it to happen, like I want us to have a friendship, and then I want it to morph into something more, and I want to feel in love, and I want to what, and then we'll have a healthy marriage, right? And then that's how I want it to happen, and that's the only way I want it to happen. And I'm not part of a church group. I'm not part of any kind of professional group. I'm sitting at home watching Netflix. So to me then, I'm saying, hey, you are not, if you're inflexible and you have a long list of must-haves, you might be being too picky. What I found is that you want to have a really short list of must-haves, maybe a really long list of preferences, and then understanding what you want. You don't have to go desperately seek a person, but you do need to give God something to work with. Put yourself in an environment where those people tend to gravitate towards. If you want a God-fearing person, I hope you're plugged into a good church or a good young adults group or a good this or good, like, get in proximity and then let the Holy Spirit work, right? So I think that's the general thing. Short list of must-haves, maybe a long list of preferences depending on how picky you are, and then just take the first couple of steps to put yourself in a place where God can work on your behalf. Do him a favor, give him something to work with.
And just to add to that, Lance, because I feel like you really covered all the bases, but I would just say to add to that, when you're thinking about, who it is that you want to settle down with, I think one thing for sure is that the longer we're single, the longer we tend to create this image of Mr. or Mrs. Perfect. And it makes it so idealistic that not even Jesus could fit those qualifications. I mean, let's just be real. You know what I mean? And so I think we have to be realistic to be able to have this list of must-haves, but preferences. But the things where I would say, well, you definitely just don't want to negotiate on is you want to look at that person's list of priorities, okay? So if you are looking for someone who loves the Lord, look at his priorities, her priorities. Do they love the Lord first? Do they come first? Or is it kind of like, well, my job is super important. Oh, my family's super important. When I get a chance, I'll get to church. Friends, if you're looking for a God-fearing person, that's not going to be the person. I'm so sorry. You will get a good idea of who they are just by where their priorities fall into place. And this was something Lance had mentioned earlier about when we have our priorities in order, God always comes first. Then it's our spouse, then our children, and then the job and the ministry, and so forth and so on. And the other thing that I would say is that when you're looking at a spouse or someone who has that potential, they might have some kind of behavior that just doesn't sit well with your spirit. Maybe they're disrespectful to people around them. Maybe they're full of anger. Maybe they struggle with an addiction. And so many times, I think, as single people, we feel like we have to settle. And, well, I can't find anybody else, so I guess it is what it is, but that's okay. Because I can pray this off of them. I can change them. And I just want to encourage each of us that the truth is that we as a human being do not have that kind of power, that only the Holy Spirit is capable of changing someone and their heart issues and their struggles. So if you are talking to somebody who you think you're going to be okay with because you can change them, I would say, please pray about that. Please let the Lord lead you, because I would hate to see you walk into a future filled with sorrow when you knew right then and there this wasn't going to work, but you were too afraid to walk away. So those would just be the two things that I would really be mindful of when praying about who it is that God has for you.
Yeah.
A couple of signals you can look to for that is one, how do they treat people that they feel are below them? Wait staff, people that if they're managers, how do they treat their employees? I look at how do they treat their siblings. Those are the people that they've lived with day in, day out for a really long time. Like what do the interactions look like? And the proof in the pudding, and Shibi, you might be able to speak to this, but like, what are the signals you look for that somebody really walks out their faith? Because integrity, if I was going to speak about my sister, integrity is huge. A teachable spirit is huge. Because in the times that there's conflict or this and that, you want to have somebody that can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I would add to what was being said in regards to looking for your spouse. Get the closest people around you involved too, right? Talk to them, right? Because they know you, they know what's good for you. Just like arranged marriages were used as a way to understand who it is that's good for this person, right? But the purpose behind it was looking at the backgrounds, looking at where they come from, what does their lineage look like, what does their parents look like, but sometimes it was used for the wrong reasons. I'm saying bring those who are close to you, who are praying for you, who are supporting you, get them involved and introduce whoever it is that you're speaking to them to kind of get a sense of things. Because you might be blinded in wanting to really make this thing work, but your friends that are around you can sense and have a spirit around what it is that they're giving off and be able to speak into that. If it's a good thing, then they'll encourage you to keep it going, praying for you, praying through. All of that is the next steps that might be there, or basically saying, I don't know, I'm a little bit concerned, I saw this and my sense is this. You might want to be aware of that. Having others really kind of be there around you to help will give you that extra confidence in knowing it. No, you'll have those things of those lists and preferences and all that stuff, but having people kind of have be your extra eyes and ears, and those who are praying with you through these things is also going to be important, because I have conversations with single folks, and when I hear that they're bringing in other people, they're having dinner with other folks, and they're trying to get others to get a feedback, I see that as a good thing for my friend who's doing those things. He goes, because he recognizes he's wanting to get to that marriage level. He wants a spouse, but so much that sometimes you get blinded by certain things. So using that, I would add to that.
If I can touch on that real quick too, that, for that single person that's maybe hearing these things from their friends, if you are close and in good relationship, like you said, with these people, and you're allowing them to speak into your life about other things, career or other family issues, be open to their feedback as well, because you've obviously cultivated a relationship with them and they're speaking into your life about other things. So be open to what they have to say in regards to this as well. I think that's important as well.
That's good. We just have a few more minutes to finish up, wrap up kind of the questions that we had prepared, and then we're going to reach out to you for your questions as well. So for the group, what are some tips for healthy communication that you guys can share?
Text everything.
Yeah.
Use WhatsApp, use texting, just everything. Make sure, one, you have proof. Use emojis really well. Use GIFs really well. I mean, you want to express how you feel in just pure text. No, seriously, don't do that unless you have to. But I think texting is funny at times. Having open, honest conversation is very important. I think recognize that when you say something, you're coming from a certain angle. Let the spouse know, hey, this is how I feel. Am I wrong in this? That type of communication is always important. And be okay with, you might hear something that you might not like, because there might be a reason for you to hear that, because you might have to change. But being vulnerable is also another part of having healthy communication, I would say.
I would add to that, Betsy, that I think so often when we look at our marriages, we often think like, oh my gosh, marriages end because of these big, huge issues. But the truth is that marriages struggle a great deal because of a lack of appropriate and healthy communication. And we don't realize that. Because I think what ends up happening is we just kind of get lost in the shuffle of everyday life. We have work, we have bills to pay, we have children to raise, and we get so lost in that one day, 25 years pass, your children graduate, they leave home, and you're looking at each other, looking at someone that you actually never made the time to talk to because life was so busy. So if there's anything that I could share about open, healthy communication, is that we want to be intentional to do it every day. And I understand, I get it, guys. That's just work. Man, when I said I do, this was supposed to be it. We were supposed to go on cruise control. We're supposed to just understand each other, read each other's minds. It didn't quite work out that way for us. Maybe it's different for you, I don't know. But for us, it really requires that we make that time every day, even if it's just for a few minutes, just to say, hey, how was your day? Anything that you want to talk about, how are you feeling about these things? And to be able to talk on a daily basis for just those few minutes, I believe makes a huge difference so that it really lays the foundation so that, when your spouse starts talking to you about those things that you don't want to hear about yourself, you're not automatically ready to throw something at them because it's kind of like we have this foundation that we can trust each other, that we can feel safe with each other, that we can share openly with one another. And when you're talking about just hearing those things that you don't like from your spouse, I love something that we had learned a few years ago, which is that your spouse is your mirror. Your spouse is a direct reflection of you, what you're saying, what you're doing, and we might not like it, we might not want to hear it, but if that's who God has trusted to be our partner in life, then we have to trust that when they're talking to us, it's because they really want to see the best in us. And so that's really where I would just emphasize communication, that it's going to be healthy when we're not so defensive and we understand that our spouse is coming from a place of love and just wanting to see us grow.
I think for me that's so good what you guys have shared. I think for me, I just have a couple of gauges I think that I use. And one thing is, would I say this to him in public? Like if somebody was, like sitting in the room with me, would I still say it? Would I say it to him? Would I say it to him in that tone? If I'm going to be embarrassed, then I shouldn't talk to him like that in private either. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't have to say everything that's on my mind. And I learned, that took me a couple of years to really figure that out. But once I did, I felt like it was a game changer. It changed our conversation rides, it changed our car rides, it changed our evenings together. What could have been an evening just of arguments and this and that really just came to a halt because I chose not to react to something that I really didn't need to react to. So I think those are my things.
Yeah, I like that too, the gauges thing. I think what I look for when it comes to healthy communication, a huge indicator is what's my ratio of questions to statements. Because healthy communication involves an exchange. And so I have to be careful to pursue context. Like if I don't like something, or if there's a behavior I don't like, or this, that, and the other, and I need to communicate about it, then I need to understand why that's happening before I say it needs to change, and this is why. And in the same way, when I'm speaking, I'm able to sit there and give them context. I don't like it when you say this because, man, when I was growing up, my dad would do this, or my mom would do this, or my brother, sister, whatever the case is, give context. So the more you pursue questions with questions, and the more context you get, it generally leads to healthier communication because it brings down the extremes that are in our minds.
Right. I would just add really quickly, I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind, that I also think listening is a huge key to communication. I think so often we think that if we just do all the talking, if we come up with all the solutions for our spouse, then they're gonna say you're the best and we're gonna have this amazing marriage, when in fact communication has a lot less to do with our mouths and a lot more with our ears, so we understand where our spouse is coming from as well.
Y'all are so wise.
I know we mentioned at the top of the hour that you guys are all in ministry and y'all are in ministry together. So I imagine there's some pros and cons to that. Do y'all have anything that you would like to share, even especially for couples that are interested in ministry and wanting to do ministry together? Do y'all have any advice or anything that you would recommend regarding that?
Well, I would.
Well,
I would just go ahead and say, start off by being super honest in saying that, yeah, there's definitely a con to being in ministry together, because the reality is there's two of us. And the truth is that we each have our giftings, we each have our talents, we each have our own agendas. And I started off at the top of the hour saying that we're both firstborns. We love forwarding our own agendas, and because we both think we're just awesome. And so that's definitely the con, when each of us have these brilliant ideas and we want to see that forwarded, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that our ideas are the ones that are at the top of the list. But with that being said, I think the greatest pro is that we can work together. And, you know, just as husband and wife, you are learning to compromise and you're learning to put your spouse before yourself. Well, likewise in ministry, when you're working together, it's about being able to hear your spouse, being able to hear their ideas, and really sitting down and brainstorming together, well, what is going to be the best thing for us to do together in ministry? And here's the thing, you know, one of the cons of doing ministry together is the fact is that as a couple who's trying to step out and serve other couples, you know, that is definitely a threat in the spiritual kingdom. Because we're trying to step in the gap to help other couples really come together and be healthy in their marriages. And that's just frowned upon in the spiritual kingdom when it comes to that darkness. So the con is that if we are not constantly aware of that, then every little thing minutes before we're about to step into ministry is we're going to start nitpicking with each other, thinking that, oh my gosh, like why can't he get with the program? And she, you know, he's thinking the same thing about me. But in fact, if we can just pause and say, hold on, what are we about to do here? All right, let's pause, let's pray. And as soon as we do that, I feel like the Lord helps us once again to refocus, see each other, and see the goal for what it is that God is calling us to do, however it is that it is serving others. And so with that, to me, that's the greatest joy, that while God has given us these individual gifts and abilities, that he brings us together to serve together. And I love that example found in the New Testament of a couple like Aquila and Priscilla. I mean, not only did they labor together making those tents, but then they took on teaching other folks. And what joy it must have been for them together to have that joy of sitting and correcting and getting someone on the correct path. And to me, that's the greatest joy, that I'm able to do that with my husband in ministry.
Yeah, I mean, the pro would be that, one, you're operating in ministry together as a spouse. Now, getting to that place, especially when you have to speak and all of that stuff, we have different styles. How long it takes to prepare, the style of preparation. Do you do bullet points? Do you write everything out? Do you prepare an hour before the whole thing, or do you spend a month prior to and preparing, making sure everything is all lined up? Do you do PowerPoints? Do you do Google Slides? Do you do animation? Do you do all of those things? Have to kind of come together to make sure that what you're trying to present, and that's where we found ourselves butting heads, like preparation, style of speaking, how we approach certain topics, who's going to take what section, how we're going to do all of those things, how we're going to alternate. I think all of those things required us to kind of go, okay, we're going to deal with this, we're going to figure this out. Why do we have to do it now? I'm busy doing this. I'll work on it next week when my mind is right. not 3 weeks prior to. I mean, I just don't have the time right now. Like, so we had to learn to figure out when to do it and how to do it and how to come together, because we might have different thoughts about how it should be laid out and how what we're going to speak about has to be laid out. Bringing that together and being on one page and being in one spirit takes a lot of effort, and it requires you to pray. It requires you to ask God to come in the middle of all that, and then you see God. The best part of it is seeing the fruition of that, and even there might be things that you might have planned for or didn't plan for. The Holy Spirit gets to operate in and through you. That's the pro that you would see in all of that. The con is really learning to work together.
Yeah.
And you think it's easy because you're husband and wife. Yeah, no, it's not. I have my own style. She has her own style. We didn't come with the same style. Yeah.
Y'all are weird. We know that.
I was only shaking my head.
I think you guys covered it.
Yeah, I know.
Great.
That's
Good.
nothing.
All right, last question that we have planned, before we address a few questions. How do you handle it, Lance and Anu, that Lance travels? How do you handle it when your spouse travels?
Yeah, so he does travel a lot for work. I think that, thankfully I do have like family and friends in the area, so I think that just kind of helps me just generally speaking. But I think that the main thing for us was just kind of setting expectations. So I know when we were first married, I had this idea that he was gonna call me in the morning, call me during lunch, call me in the evening, and then during his breaks in between. And I'm thinking, like, you're so far away, of course you'd want to stay connected to me like that. But I didn't understand that corporate kind of the travel and what really was involved with that. And so I think if you have a spouse that travels, then just really have a conversation with them and just find out, okay, what does your day really look like? And here's what I feel like I need. What do you think you can do? Like, again, it kind of comes back to this whole negotiation thing. What can we do to kind of be at a good place with this? Because if this is how it's going to be, it's how it's going to be. So for Lance and I, he knows that in the mornings I need a point of contact, even if it's just a text, just a good morning. And we've had some mornings and that's all he can do because he's running around, and that's okay. And then we make it a point to also pray together when he's away over the phone, when we can talk. And so I think for me those have been really big things. And I also use the time that he's away for my own things. Like I'll adjust my work time, or I'll connect with a girlfriend, or I use that time also for things that I can do. So I think that's what's covered.
So it's important to stay connected even though you might be separate.
Yeah, definitely staying connected to each other and just staying connected to other people too, because or else I could just be like work home, and that's it. So it's like, yeah.
That's good.
I do want to ask real quick too, kind of the opposite of that as
Yeah.
well, with many people working from home these days, and a lot of husbands and wives working from home. Shibu, I know you work from home, and Joyce, you're home homeschooling. I imagine that's pleasant all the time, and it's just lovebird singing. But how does that work out for y'all, and what kind of boundaries have y'all had to establish?
Yeah, I think Joyce made it very clear up front to the kids that Daddy's working, doors are closed, do not go knocking, don't go looking, always check to see if he's on a call. So she established the routines that kids are allowed to do, that they know that especially she'll ask, do I have any meetings? When are those meetings? So that she can make sure that the kids and the conversations that are happening because my office and where homeschooling is shared by a single wall. So I can hear what's going on and they can hear what's going on. So we make sure that there's a mutual understanding of when it is appropriate to be a little loud or not be loud, or if I'm on a call, that certain things are in place to be quiet so that I can have that conversation, and then let them know that I'm done with the call, so you guys can go back to normal volume, all of those types of things. We also have a little bit of a doorknob thing that we used to flip, on a call, not a call, but never really worked out, but that was one thing. But the kids would come, sometimes would look, they'd be real quiet and they'd go, I'm like, you can come in, you know, type of thing. So from a young age, that was established. I do go into the office a little bit more often now, but even when I was working from home, and that was for like 6-7 years, these were the boundaries that Joyce had put into place, and it really helped in understanding that this is the time when we're going to all sit down and eat for lunch, and these are when my meetings are going to happen. This is when I'm done. That made it very easy for me to conduct business, and the kids knew that Daddy was working.
Awesome. So we have a question from one of our viewers. What do you do when you and your spouse have been living like roommates for years? You tried counseling too, but your spouse is not ready to let go of the past and move on. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, where they have a past, it's hard to move on from that. So what would you say to that person that has that question?
I think, alright, so I think when we're talking about people who are not willing to let go of the past, that's one of those things where oftentimes, not all the time, oftentimes the person that had the transgression, the person who did it, is has a time frame in their mind of how things should recover, and it's usually a lot quicker than the other person is ready to accept. But they haven't ever had that conversation, right? So living like roommates for years indicates to me like there's no emotional or physical intimacy, or very little of that. And the fact that it's the living in the past kind of tells me, okay, the reason this exists now is because of an event that happened that broke that, or a series of events that broke that. So I think instead of trying to continue pressing forward, you may have to take the uncomfortable path back to where it happened, why it happened, and then you have to talk to your spouse about, what do you need? Like, what do you feel like you need in order for us? I want this relationship to work. I want this marriage to work. I don't want to just feel like I'm living with a roommate. What do you need? What can I do for you to do that? Because this whole thing of not letting go or holding it on, we tend as the transgressor to hold that against them. Like, I moved on, why didn't you move on? Well, you weren't the one that was hurt. So if you're the one doing the hurting, it's on us to go back and say, I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry we haven't had this conversation before, but I'm here to serve. Like, I want to make this right. How can we make this right? But you got to go first as the transgressor. And then that person is going to have to go through the process of saying it wasn't all them, it was me too, but they'll have to self-reveal that. That's where counseling or like a re-engage that might help kind of uncover some of that. But yeah, if you're not happy with it, then you have to go back to where it happened.
Yeah, I would just add the uncomfortable part in this is stating the actual elephant in the room. We are living like roommates. Why? Why are we in this place? What brought us here? Do you want to continue this, or do you want to move on and have a better relationship and bring it back into something along the lines of, I want a stronger marriage? I think getting to the root of that and having that true conversation is going to be key. Now, if you had that conversation and you moved on, I think we're counseling and group sessions and all those type of things to help walk you through, because there's something there, like Len said, there's something that caused it, working and peeling and figuring out the healing process behind understanding why the event actually happened or events happened, what the feelings were that came out from those things, and how to process that and be healed of that, so that you're not living like roommates anymore, but you're living as husband and wife. I think that's going to be the key to it.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you guys for joining us. It's always really great when you guys are here, and y'all have a wealth of wisdom, and so we really appreciate you guys being here. Lance, if you will pray and close us out with prayer.
God, we're thankful for time that we get to spend talking about something that's really important, not just to us, but to you. And so we're thankful, God, for the transparency, for the authenticity, the ability to talk about our weaknesses and not just the things that we're kind of good at now. And so, God, we just pray for everyone that's listening. We pray for everyone that's going to listen by watching this later, that at least some of the things that we talk about, that you'll use it to spark a thought that leads to action, which would lead to transformation in their relationships. And so, Father, won't you take what we've done and magnify it and use it and amplify the message that you're trying to get across to the people that you want. And I just pray over the people that are listening, that their homes would start to be more peaceful, that conversations would seem different, that perspectives and the ways we look at things would start to be different, and that it would start to produce change, and that we would grow closer to what you have called us to be and what you asked us to be as married couples. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for joining us, and make sure you check out our Facebook page, check us out on Instagram, and our website for our next event. Bye.